Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited that so many of you could join us this evening for On Embracing Anxiety. I'm Alex Elliott, the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Before we get into the conversation, I'm going to introduce our presenters this evening, Elizabeth Markle and Karla McLaren, and then we will jump into the conversation. Elizabeth Markle is a licensed psychologist, professor, and assistant professor of community mental health at California Institute of Integral Studies. Elizabeth is also founder and executive director of Open Source Wellness, a clinical community integration initiative offering experiential behavior health and wellness via a behavioral pharmacy approach for individuals and families. Karla McLaren is an award-winning author, social science researcher, and empathy pioneer. Her lifelong work focuses on her grand unified theory of emotions, which revalues even the most negative emotions and opens startling new pathways into self-awareness, effective communication, and healthy empathy. She's the founder and CEO of Emotion Dynamics LLC and the developer of the Empathy Academy online learning site. Her applied work, Dynamic Emotional Integration, also known as DEI, is a trailblazing approach to emotions and empathy that reveals the genius and the healing power within the emotional realm. Now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and Karla.
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome, Karla. I'm so glad to have you here with us today.
Hello.
So, I know we're all here to talk about embracing anxiety, and these are certainly anxiety-provoking times. Look at that, brand new, beautiful book. But before we dive deep into anxiety, I'm hoping we can just talk a little bit about how you got into this work and the broader topic of emotions and your grand unified theory of emotion. So where should we begin?
Where do we begin with emotions? Emotions, I have come to see, are the foundation of everything we do, everything we think, all of our behaviors, our actions, our ideas. But we have been taught to deny, suppress, overexpress, ignore, or treat emotions as a problem in and of themselves. And what I have come to realize is that emotions are not the problem. Emotions come forward to bring you the gifts and skills you need to deal with the problem. So when I think there's been for many centuries what I call the fundamental attribution error of emotions, which is when there's trouble, there's a lot of emotions, right?
Mm-hmm,
So you would think trouble, emotions, let's get rid of the emotions. And the emotions come to help. So looking at it that way, you're like, oh, look at all the skills I have. Look at all this genius, rather than go away, you terrible emotions. So each emotion has its own specific gift and skill and form of intelligence. And so my work, Dynamic Emotional Integration, or DEI, is about connecting with the emotions again, even though we've had centuries of training in how to, well, distrust them and sometimes hate them.
Thank you. It's magnificent work that you're bringing forward into the world. I'm curious. I'm imagining if I'm listening to your work out there and hearing that emotions are in fact our friends. If I were to play devil's advocate, part of me wants to say, but they're so painful sometimes, right? If someone were to say, Karla, how could this be good? It hurts so much. What might you say?
I would say a lot of things, but the first thing I would say is, for instance, let's say grief. Grief comes forward when someone or something that you care about or love has died. It's gone forever. There's nothing you can do about it. You didn't choose it. It's done. And grief is a very, very powerful emotion, as you know. And people feel pain and they attribute the pain to the grief. Rather than attributing the pain to the fact that the person or the idea or the thing or the job or whatever has died and it will never come back. And so
Mm.
grief comes to help. And a lot of people look at the grief and say, get away from me. You're horrible. Um, and so each emotion has a lot of people have this relationship with many emotions in that they they attribute the trouble to the emotion rather than understanding that the emotion comes to help with the specific trouble. And sometimes more than one comes. So if you don't like emotions very much and there's trouble, you may feel that the emotions are just making your life miserable, right?
Yeah. Can you give some more examples of how emotions help, maybe specific emotions and what they help us with?
Each emotion has its own gig that it does. I'll start with anger. Anger helps us understand what we value, and it helps us set boundaries around what is important to us. And that's anger's job. Now, how we learn to work with anger is completely up to us. Although, is it really up to us if we've never been taught thing one about it, right?
Mm, mm,
So, how I say what's valuable to me and how I set boundaries around it, that is on me to develop skills if I can. Where do you develop these skills, right? So I can set boundaries with violence. I can refuse to set boundaries and I can be very passive, or I can set a clear boundary so that everybody knows what's going on with me. And me and my anger we're pals, right? Another one is fear. Fear gets a terrible rap. There's so many terrible messages about fear, but it's basically your instincts and in your intuition about the present moment. So fear helps you key into what is happening, what's happening there. Are there changes? Is anything different? Is anything making a transition? My fears is aware of the present moment. Um, and fear, unfortunately, is um, squished together with anxiety and panic.
mm,
And so when people think of fear, they usually think of like that,
mm.
which that could be, but that's usually panic. Panic is the emotion that comes forward when your life is in danger. And so it brings that intense fight, flee, or freeze emotions, very powerful emotion, but it's not fear. They're different emotions. And then our poor friend anxiety gets squashed in between fear and panic. And anxiety's job is to look toward the future and bring you the energy and intelligence you need to gather everything you need to show up in the future skillful and well resourced, and you did your job and your tasks are completed and you hit your deadlines. And sometimes anxiety can be very intense because you got 9 deadlines tomorrow, right?
Uh-huh.
So you may want to be calm at that point, but I would question why if it's all due tomorrow, right? I would also question where's your delegation skills? Why, why didn't you set a boundary around any of that sort of thing? But each of these emotions kind of gets treated as a problem when actually the emotions are coming to help you with a problem.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is that fear is about right now and anxiety is about the future.
Mhm.
And that anxiety's job is to mobilize you to pay attention to the future and engage to take the steps now that make for a good future. Do I have that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. If you and your anxiety are good friends, I call it time travel that works. Right? You can look back and you go, thank you, Karla, from the past.
Uh-huh.
That was awesome.
Right. So like a scout that gets out ahead and reports back and says, here's what we need from you from the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finish that thing and put it in the file and, organize the spices and alphabetize things. Right. And then you show up and you're like, it's all alphabetized. It's magic.
Well, some people love alphabetizing things and some really don't. And, you
Yeah, they
write in your
do.
book about people responding to anxiety in very different ways. Can you
Yeah.
share?
Yeah. There's some beautiful work by Mary Lamia, who teaches in Berkeley, and she is a psychologist and a professor, and she wrote a book called What Motivates Getting Things Done. And it's all about anxiety, but it's not anywhere in the title because you know how people feel about anxiety. And she identified two different kinds of anxiety responses or responders. One is what is called a task-oriented person. This is a person who likes lists, alphabetizing, bullet points, right? They want to go from thing to thing, and they work with their anxiety at kind of a, a slow boil almost, just like their anxiety is just continual. The other person is deadline focused, and they may relax up to a deadline and then hit a very intense level of anxiety, which works for them, and then they do it the night before. That person is generally called a procrastinator. And we have put procrastinators in the shadow and underneath the rug. And most procrastinators have learned to feel ashamed about the way that they work with their anxiety. And I think a lot of us have looked at procrastinators and thought, you are both lazy and lucky, right? We don't see it as a valid way to work with anxiety.
Mm.
And so that was just such a brilliant piece that, I talk about Mary Lamia in the book, but to know if you are a procrastinator, that is a perfectly acceptable way to work with your anxiety. And you've got skills and you've got magic in the way that the alphabetizing, list maker does. But actually, it could be that procrastinators are a bit more chill, like they can just chill up to a deadline. Whereas I'm a task person, so I'm tasking, 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 tasking. I don't chill. So I've had to learn to chill. Like it's a skill now to chill. And my
Yeah.
anxiety is like, what about that list? I'm like, stop it. I made a list.
Got it. So what I'm imagining then is that, maybe a week out, anxiety is very faint. It's like a whisper.
Yeah.
And the task-oriented people kind of hear it at a whisper and get in action around it.
Yeah.
And that the deadline-oriented people actually like to wait until there is the energy boost, the adrenaline even, that fuels them into brilliant and rapid action. And easy for the task-oriented people to look and say, you're doing it wrong. But really that's not the case. It's just an entirely different approach.
Yeah. This helped my relationships a lot because I have deadline focused people who work for me, and my husband is deadline focused. And I would come with my task oriented, I've got this going on, I've got everything worked out. And I was so frustrated with them. And reading this difference that procrastinators are, they have their own form of genius. Now I look at them and I'm like, look at you relaxing. You're like a mentor for me on how to do this. The idea is we can't change our types. But I've been trying to procrastinate. I've been trying to intentionally procrastinate. I'm still not very good at it. I'm very clumsy, but I'm getting better.
Wow, I think I still need to work on that. So you mentioned in your writing that when an emotion comes up, we have options about how we're going to work with it. And I think we can express them, we can repress them, and we can channel them. And I'm wondering if you can share more about that as it relates to anxiety.
With anxiety, I think a lot of people, because they haven't really identified it as itself, it's kind of squished up with panic, that when anxiety comes, people may feel this increase in energy and focus and get stuff done and just want to shut it down. They would want to repress it and just calm themselves the frack down, right? You're going to breathe, enjoy, and breathe out anxiety. And your anxiety is like, why is joy here? This is not a joy situation. We got some stuff to do. So, a suppressing or repressing or intentionally down regulating an emotion, that's an option, but you're not working with the emotion, you're working against it. And let's say your anxiety is very high and you don't really know how to work with it. So let's go express it. So you're going to run around the house. Did I turn off the stove? I think we need to do wallpaper in here. And then, you're just spinning around and where did I put my checkbook? Damn it. Where's my checkbook? Right. So that would be expressing it without consciousness, right? You and your anxiety are on a trip to the moon.
Right.
You
And
may
you're
never
probably
get
driving
there.
everybody else crazy during the process.
And where's your checkbook? Right. Or you may focus yourself with your anxiety and get stuff done so hard that you forget to eat,
Mm.
right? You don't take care of yourself. Okay, I can't exercise today. And you just put your head down and you put your nose to the grindstone and you go, right? And in that way, you're kind of working for your anxiety. With the suppression, you're working against. With too much expression that is not, you're really not conscious or aware, you're working for. But with channeling, and by channeling, I mean when you create a channel for something and it goes the way that it needs to go. So by channeling, I mean understand what each emotion does and then pair up with it as its friend and help it. So if anxiety comes and brings you all this energy to get things done, then there's a question to ask of it, which is what brought this feeling forward? And you just sit, okay, this. And then the next question is what truly needs to get done? And the truly is a kind of a down regulation. It's a kind of a grounding, but it's not a down regulation that's suppressive or repressive. It's a down regulation that drops you into the wisdom of the emotion. And so with each of the emotions, we have questions that are focused on that emotion's job. And that way you and your anxiety can work together as partners, and then you can uptake all the brilliance and genius and all of that energy of anxiety, but also take care of yourself at the same time. So you're not spinning and you're not working yourself like a draft horse that nobody loves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, you're painting a beautiful, nuanced picture of how an emotion could arise, and we could say, "Oh, a messenger," or "Welcome, friend. Let's have a conversation," or "I'm so glad you've arrived to be with me here today." And as a clinician and just as a human, what I often see in myself and others is that an emotion comes up, and my thought is, this shouldn't be happening, or I don't want this here. And then before I know it, I'm suffering about suffering, right? There's a compounding of the emotion.
Yeah, we call it you're having a feeling about a feeling. You're having emotions about emotions. You're afraid of fear, you're anxious about anxiety, you're angry about anger. And a lot of times there's like an emotion pileup. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
if we're taught to see anxiety as a disease or a character flaw, and we feel anxiety, we might also feel angry or afraid or ashamed, right? And now we've got four emotions. They all came to deal with the trouble. They all came to deal with the problem. Now we've got four emotions. Do we have a practice for any of them? Right? And so for when that happens to people, I can understand why people say, who wants emotions? They're a mess. Because when you get an emotion pile up like that, yeah, it feels like a mess. It just, there's no other word for it. It feels like a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, as a professor of counseling psychology, I, like it or not, I'm teaching my students the DSM, right? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of all the ways that mental health challenges emerge and how we classify them. And I'm curious about your thoughts about the sort of the pathology paradigm being dominant in our mental health discourse versus this more empathic, valuing paradigm that you're promoting. How do we reconcile these?
It is very difficult to reconcile them.
Hmm.
My idea of the empathic paradigm came from the neurodiversity paradigm, which I studied in my master's thesis. And it's the idea that there's all kinds of different minds, and that there's neurotypical minds and there's neurodivergent minds, and they're all acceptable forms of ways that minds are. But the pathology paradigm is that only a neurotypical mind is the right one. And so an ADHD one, that's broken, and an autistic one, that's broken. And here's all the things we do to these people to make them normal, which is obviously a form of violence. But it's the same with emotions. For instance, anxiety is a DSM category,
Yeah.
right? It's not like, here's a human emotion, slap it into the DSM. You know, panic is a DSM category, and depression is a DSM category. So we're taught in the pathology paradigm that when these emotions come up, they themselves are the trouble. They themselves are the problem. And so the only way that we have to work with that is to somehow get them to go away,
Mhm.
to somehow shut them up and make them go away. And the empathic paradigm is these emotions are here for a reason. So, what is the reason? How do we support them? How do we grow and evolve into people who can function as emotional beings in a world that has taught us to distrust and hate emotions?
Right. And to think of emotions as inferior to reason and intellect and science.
Sorry, I grew up with geniuses, and I have to say, if people think that, they've never met geniuses. Because people who are, I call them head cases, people who are too thinky and not connected to their emotions can create these, you know, really intricate things that no human could live in,
Mm,
you know, because they
mm.
don't have that emotional, you know, emotive understanding of the world. So I just made fun of geniuses. So I put geniuses in the pathology paradigm. Excuse me, I'll
Ooh,
pull them back out.
ooh. Well, I appreciate you sharing just a little bit about your own origins. And I wonder if there's anything you might share about how you, growing up in a family of geniuses, came to be a deep expert in emotion.
Well, one of the reasons I talked about that is we had a lot of genius in our family, and so we would name things like you are the waffle making genius, and you are the genius with buying cars, and you. It's like we would move genius around. And one of the areas of genius that always made everybody laugh uproariously was emotional genius. Um, and we would say an emotional genius, that's not even a thing, right? That you couldn't have someone who could maintain genius or be a genius and be emotional, because emotions are the anti-rational, you're out of control. You know, look at the DSM. 5 of the 7 deadly sins are emotions. The 6th is an eating disorder. The 7th is sex. What is that about? Okay, what is going on? So, my first book, the first book that I wrote about this was called Emotional Genius, because I thought I'm going to take that
Mm.
back, and I'm going to find out how could a person use genius and find the genius of emotions in a world where the emotions are so um, unloved.
Wow. And you have really framed emotions as not mistaken or broken, but as sources of valuable and important information or truth about the world.
Mhm.
And, you know, if we dare really get into current events, we are in times where there are things beyond our control, COVID-19 being one of them, that are anxiety provoking. And I'm curious about what when you have a lot of anxiety and there's not something you can immediately do to make it better.
List making, planning. Um, Something I've noticed is that people are dealing with multiple emotions right now that are necessary, but are difficult if they don't have a practice for even one of them.
Mm.
So, what I see is fear, anxiety, and panic coming together. Fear to help you be aware, where's my mask? You know, where's my hand sanitizer? Am I going out? Do I have everything I need? Anxiety, uh, what more do I need to buy? You know, what do I need to do to plan for the future? Do I have enough masks? That sort of thing. And also panic, because people are dying. This COVID is, it's not a joke. It's people are getting sick and being sick for months and being injured, even if they don't die, and people are dying. So panic is very much welcome in this situation to help us save our lives, to help us make those decisions. And so the problem is there's so much uncertainty. Although people are trying to push certainty before they should, so the reopening, like we're going to get back to normal. Um, and the problem I see is that it's realistic. It's increasing panic, and people are getting more and more angry and
Mm.
more, you know, frustrated and more fighty because they're not listening to these three emotions. They're just like slap, slap, slap. I'm not as scared, you know, don't panic, don't be anxious, go out there, you don't need a mask, that sort of thing. And all of these emotions are like, oh, geez. There should be like a support group for people's panic and anxiety and fear right now.
Mhm.
They really
Mhm.
should. All these emotions should get together and talk about their owners. Just like, really?
It reminds me of the movie Inside Out. You
Yeah.
could have you have anxiety and anxiety. They could have a whole convention.
Yeah. It's like, you wouldn't believe what my person just did. Oh, yeah, I'll tell you a story about, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other thing that we're in the middle of right now is, of course, a massive and much overdue uprising around Black Lives Matter. And you wrote so beautifully about the chronic activation of anxiety and vigilance that is necessary and appropriate in marginalized or oppressed populations. And I wonder if there's anything you might want to share about that.
I think that's become so evident to us, and maybe we didn't know it or we didn't need to know it
Mm,
before, but just the level of unwelcome and unsafety that mm, people of color, LGBTQIA people, disabled people, elders, um, that it's really not a safe place if you're at all vulnerable.
mm,
And these people I would call sort of anxiety and panic experts because there's a way that you need to learn to live with these emotions, and you need to learn to read social situations and try to keep yourself safe in whatever way you can. But how do we support people who are dealing with that level of activation all the time? And a part of it is um, uh, working for social justice and voting out the racists, and changing this from the top down, doing as much as we possibly can, but also taking some of this on ourselves, as white people, taking it on and feeling it and claiming it, claiming the racism, claiming the sexism, claiming the transphobia, claiming everything that we haven't had to claim before. Um, but I would say there's so much going on about offering soothing practices to help people who are in these situations, whether it be yoga or mindfulness or breathing or something, so that they can have a sense of being able to downregulate, not as a repressive act, but as a self care act. And yeah.
yeah, thank you. It occurs to me that in order for us to be able to take these things on, we need a certain level of skill in working with our emotions. And I wonder if we could just start talking about, okay, with this wisdom, what can we do?
For me, the emotions that I see people who are holding on so tightly to the old ways are an inability to grieve, to see what has happened. I see a difficulty working with um, shame.
Mm,
Shame is huge.
mm,
And I see a difficulty working with panic and fear and anxiety. Um, Someone on Twitter, and I wish I had grabbed it, said that this isn't an information processing issue. People don't need more information. This is a terror management issue. And so we're not seeing people's, I'm going to put the finger quotes, rational behaviors. We're seeing their emotional behaviors or lack thereof. And so giving more information to people when they're that activated is it's not going to do anything. It is connecting, humanizing, and bringing in those emotions if the people don't know how to feel them. I'm doing that a lot now. For a while, I was like taking people out on Facebook. Don't tell anybody. But I'm now going in and working with moving in and sort of befriending people and bringing in grief. And I can settle a whole Facebook thread. It is
Mm.
fascinating. I mean, some people are still going off, but there will start to be a room for grief, and it will become a little bit of a grief shrine in this Facebook thread where people are fighting about masks or Black Lives Matter or whatever it
Mm.
was. And so I'm learning. I think we're all learning. Which emotions do we need to bring to this? Because the whole anger and rage, that's not working anymore. Also telling people what's what, that's not working anymore.
Less effective, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm so curious about really what it is that you do that can settle a contentious and escalated conversation. How is it that you bring in emotional wisdom?
I mean, it's sort of you working with all of the different emotions, but and this is something Dr. David Campt is working with. There's a course that he has called Empathy is Your Superpower, how white allies can be better at talking about racism to other white people. And his idea is get people out of their ideology. Like, don't fight ideology.
Mm.
Get people into their stories and ask them, well, tell me a story about when you decided that all lives matter was an important thing for you, right? And so what I'm doing then is I'm working with my sadness, which helps you let go. I'm working with my grief, understanding that there's something that has happened to this person that makes them unable to empathize across lines of race and conflict. And so that's where, I'm actually calling to my emotions to help me um, um, work the situation. And what I'm finding is that people don't want to be fighting like that. It's exhausting. And as soon as someone witnesses them and asks them a question, the whole thing settles. And then I can tell a story and we can come together. I'm not going to change things right away, right? But I'm not going to push them further into their terror management problems. And I'm not going to push them further into their ideology. Because if I fight, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a strong ideology and people are fighting with you, it just strengthens you.
Mm-hmm.
Just like bring it. Because now I'm 1000% of this ideology, right? But if someone asks you a question, there's an opening. And
Mm.
that cement that you've put around yourself begins to rehumanize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, it's sort of common dogma in counseling psychology that people need to feel understood. And I would actually say I'm hearing something beyond that people need to feel felt. Beyond the intellectual content of their position, they need to feel that you are getting and resonating with the actual emotion behind their perspective. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Yeah. They need to be empathized with. And that means getting into it, having a relationship with people. And that's
Mm.
what I see. I mean, that started happening before 2016, but people were very proud about unfriending people, and they still are. And I'm
Right.
like, where does this go?
Uh-huh.
Where does this go? I know that if people are very, very toxic, we need to protect ourselves. But it wasn't that level of emotion that I was seeing. People were saying, ha, I unfriended that person. It was very, yeah, there was a lot of intensity, not sorrow. And I think people just don't know what to do with their intense emotions or how to be in conflict in such a way that they maintain their humanity and the dignity of the other person. I know I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is a goal worth striving for, right? If our humanity is in fact at stake. I'm imagining the audience is entirely enrolled and saying, okay, Karla, sign me up. But I didn't grow up being taught about emotion, right? None of us got emotions 101. So where is the first step? I imagine for most people, there's some emotions that they're comfortable with and others they'd rather never touch. What do you think we do to begin our own emotional education?
Well, the best part of this is that it's really, really simple, which is to develop a stronger emotional vocabulary. And just doing that will help people learn to regulate their emotions. That's so funny, that it doesn't have to be difficult, but what we need to do is understand emotions at many different levels of activation so that we can start to locate ourselves when our emotions come up instead of, I feel bad, right? What is in bad, right? To develop many, many different levels of articulation about emotion. And so over the years, I developed an emotional vocabulary list on Facebook and my website, and I put it up on my website for free so that everybody could have access to it. And I mean free, not internet free, where you have to, trade me your email address. No, I mean free. But uh, people have challenged me about that, but I was like, there is no downside to more people having good emotional vocabularies. There's no loss to me at all. It's all valuable. So yay.
Great. So just can you give us an example of that? I'm imagining with anxiety, there's a whole scale of intensity. Can you orient us to that just a little bit?
Yeah, in the book, I have the emotional vocabulary list with each of the families. And so I have the list in soft, medium, and intense presentations of that emotion. So soft anxiety might be apprehensive, um, concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Medium anxiety might be edgy, um, anxious, nervous, and intense anxiety might be um, overwrought, um, super energized, that sort of thing, so that you can identify where you are in the continuum of anxiety. And especially with anxiety, there's been research that suggests that if you can just say to yourself, okay, I'm anxious, you can calm down your whole organism, because many of the sensations that go along with anxiety also go along with heart attacks if it's really high. So if you can tell your body this is anxiety, your body will go, oh, okay. That's great, because a lot of people will show up at an emergency room with a heart attack that's anxiety and panic. So knowing what your emotions are can save you a lot of time and money.
I believe it. And yes, we're so familiar with that cascade of sensation and then a thought that's catastrophized and then more sensation and more thought. And pretty soon you have a panic attack. Yeah. Okay, just to play devil's advocate again, what if somebody is saying to you, okay, Karla, I can name my emotions. I'm feeling terror. I'm feeling angsty. It doesn't make it go away. What might you recommend when someone is just struggling to be with it?
Yeah. Well, with terror, which is in panic, um, there are, first of all, we check and see, is your life endangered right now? Right, we orient. Is there something, is there a tiger in the room? All right, so take care of that first. And if there isn't any danger right now, then we generally think of this as panic or terror that come from something that happened in the past where a person was overwhelmed. And the best approach to that I've found is um, somatic approaches, specifically somatic experiencing, which is done by Peter Levine, where you go back and find that traumatized and terrified person as yourself and help them come out of whatever frozen state they're
Mhm.
in. So it's really important. It's crucial that your emotions tell you that this has happened, that there's a part of you that's trapped, but it's it's very uncomfortable. And as you know, but it should be uncomfortable because there's a problem. And so your emotions are trying to tell you, friend, or like this, Karla, 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 shut up, Karla, 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 Karla. But with each emotion, there are there are practices for each emotion that deal with that emotion's needs and situations.
Wonderful. Well, I know we don't have infinite time here, but I'm wondering if we could, if there's a practice that we could do together, how could we give people an experience of working empathically and intelligently with emotion?
Let me start with one simple meditation. And if people could, you can have your eyes open or closed. Get yourself comfortable in wherever you're sitting or standing. And what I'd like you to do is just lean forward a little bit. You can open your mouth a little bit if that helps. And listen for the quietest sound where you are. My voice is not the quietest sound, but listen through my voice to the quietest sound. And you'll find yourself going through the different sounds around you and finally finding that one quiet sound. And congratulations, you have accessed the softest activation of fear. It's that capacity to orient to change and novelty. And my talking was also your capacity to orient around annoying things, your capacity to focus and keep focusing and refocusing, even though I am intentionally making noise. And a lot of people don't have any kind of physical awareness that that's fear. They would only know fear when it rose to a level of, and at that point, we're near panic, right?
Mhm.
We're near feeling, if there's a sense of dread or danger, then panic would need to be there because your life may need to be saved, right? But fear is just that, what's going on around me, and I'm orienting to it. So that is one of my favorite ways to sort of get into the emotional realm, because everybody's working with fear all the time, every day, and they don't know it because fear has been, squirreled together with panic and with anxiety too. So there's this like, grr, so people can't bring it out. So if you're feeling fear and anxiety and panic, the questions are, what's happening right now? Does anything need my attention? No, it's all good. Am I going to be murdered right now?
Mm.
Nope. Okay, so the panic may be from the past. There's nothing to watch out for right now. Anxiety, what do I need to prepare? Right? And so that's a way to work with all three emotions by connecting with what each of them does. So it's very simple. We've been working with our emotions our whole lives, but we don't have language for it. And we don't know how to identify the emotions because they've been so pathologized.
Right. You're almost describing sort of a cabinet of allies or of yeah, companions on the path that can offer you different resources as needed.
Yes, yes. For instance, some people don't have enough anxiety. And, and I would be like, you need to get your anxiety in there because this is due tomorrow. Let's go. Right.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's a very unusual way to think about it, right? Because most people
Yeah,
would say, I don't want any of that nonsense.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you describe another practice in your book. I think it's conscious questioning
Mhm.
that helps bring some insight to whatever emotion is arising that might not be of obvious utility in the moment. Is this something you could share with us or want to talk through?
Sure. I can talk through it. And yeah, let me just talk through it. It is in the book. Um, and gee, what page is it on? Here we go. Um, So conscious questioning for anxiety leans into the skills that anxiety brings you and the specific genius it has. So if you are listening and you can grab something to write with and paper or your tablet, think about something that you're anxious about right now, um, something that is nagging at you. And on the paper or tablet, write down the answer to these questions. There's more questions than this, but I'm just going to ask a couple in deference to time. This is on page 85 of Embracing Anxiety. First, what are your strengths and resources? Second, are there any upcoming deadlines? Third, have you achieved or completed something similar in the past? Fourth, can you delegate any tasks or ask for help? And fifth, what is one small task that you can complete tonight or today? Just something small. There are more questions in this practice. But basically what we're doing, notice that none of them were about artificially calming ourselves and stepping away from the anxiety. They were all leaning into the anxiety and treating anxiety as if it had its own intelligence and was here for a reason to help us. Or as Rumi says, all of the emotions have been sent as a gift from beyond. Welcome them all. Anxiety is a lovely, unloved, misunderstood emotion. And we literally couldn't get anything done without it. Our confusion about it, its connection to panic. I have a whole chapter on panic and anxiety, and we call it pangxiety. We just make up words for emotions that like to hang out together. But also in this chapter about conscious questioning, what happens if you do conscious questioning and your energy drops? What happens if you get more anxious? What happens if you feel depression coming on? What happens if you're confused? Then I send you to a chapter where we look at those other emotions as well. So it doesn't mean you're bad at anxiety. It means there's another emotion there trying to help you.
Thank you for that experience. I'm looking forward to hearing how our listeners experienced that and what their feedback might be. A question that came up for me was about the so-called positive emotions. And we don't want to say emotions are good or bad, but joy, contentment, what should we know about these experiences?
One of the first things that we learn in DEI is that there are no negative emotions and there are no positive emotions. And that's really hard for people because that's probably the only thing people do know about emotions. There's good ones and bad ones. The positive emotions, you're right, happiness, contentment, and joy, or permutations thereof. There's three lovely emotions, and they're so valuable and so beautiful, and they have just really specific jobs that nobody seems to understand because people want to slap these emotions on top of everything, right? I'm feeling anxious. Breathe in joy. And joy's like, what are you even talking about right now? I don't even know where you're going with this, but okay. And anxiety's like, really? So the positive emotions tend to get overused and even in some cases abused. We tend to behave in abusive ways toward these emotions because we are not taught to see them as three members of a 17-member family band, and none of which is more or less important than the others. And I have a group of 17 emotions. Of course, there's all these, gradations of emotions. So there's all these words, but I'm like, sort of, this is anger, this is hatred, this is sadness. So we have 17 like big daddy categories. Um, but happiness, contentment, and joy tend to get overused for almost everybody, unless people are dealing with depression or other emotional states where these emotions can't peek their head through. But thinking of them as positive causes, if I tell you an emotion is negative and you feel it a lot, there might be an emotion pileup because you shouldn't do that. So you're going to have shame and fear and sadness and grief and blah, blah, and depression just about this one emotion. But if I tell you an emotion is positive, which means wanted, which means pro-social, which means pleasant, and you don't feel it very often, you are also going to have an emotion pileup of depression and shame and fear and da 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 da. So just saying that emotions are negative and positive makes people essentially emotionally incompetent right away. It's like immediately, I'm going to make you emotionally incompetent. And so we end up chasing after the 3 positive emotions as if they're prizes at the fair, instead of emotions that live inside us and are accessible in every moment. And we throw away the 14 supposedly negative emotions as if they are character flaws or bugs that we don't want. And what we end up with is a very arid desert where there should be so much water and so much emotion and all this genius and gifts and skills. And we end up having this very barren landscape. And so when an emotion comes up, all we know how to do is just run to happiness, contentment, and joy.
Mm.
And so I think we're going to have to like happiness, contentment, and joy are going to have a strike.
Well, they do go on strike sometimes, right?
You go on strike. It's like, we've had it with you. We have had it with you. You're the worst boss we've ever had. Are we getting paid extra? No, we're not.
Wow. Okay. Emotionally incompetent, fundamentally as a society. I want to ask you for your message to different populations. So I'm sure there are parents out there going, oh my goodness, am I raising emotionally incompetent children? What is it that parents can do to support emotional nuance and generosity with their children?
That's difficult. I've written a children's book, but it breaks all the rules of children's books. So I'm going to have to find like a really brilliant agent to help me with this. But I did put the anxiety part of the children's book in the back of Embracing Anxiety. And what I teach is help kids develop a vocabulary for their emotions and teach them to play with their emotion when they're calm, so that you have a way to talk to them about their emotion when they're just hanging out, and you have a way to play with emotions. So here's some of the things you would do with the kids. Pretend that you have to clean your room if you want to go camping this weekend, but you keep putting it off and off and off. Ask your anxiety to help you get moving. Pretend that you have a ridiculously hard job, like building a working bicycle out of marshmallows. Where do you start, and who could help you? Right? So I give the kids an anxiety situation, and then have them develop skills around that, so that you could say when the kid is running around and it's just too much, like, remember the bicycle made of marshmallows. Are you asking for help? Or something along those lines, so that you develop a language with kids around their emotions.
Beautiful. And I imagine doing our own work as parents is essential to being able to model that for children, not just telling them what to do, but actually showing them with our own process what channeling emotion looks like.
And what's so nice about kids is they will call you out every time you make a mistake.
That is the beauty, isn't it?
Brilliant.
Okay, well then here's a different question. This is CIIS. There are probably a lot of therapists and students becoming therapists in the audience. And as clinicians, we get the request all the time, my emotions hurt, can you make them better? And I wonder what wisdom you have for folks who are professional feeling making betters, or at least that's sort of how we get identified.
Yeah, I would say that there are things that you can do to help a person become more comfortable, like learning. I have, I think, 6 or 7 skills in here for learning how to ground yourself, how to set boundaries, how to focus, how to soothe yourself, how to choose and work with the emotions intentionally, right? So that it's not all just let's have grief and anxiety and panic all day, yay. but but to learn ways to care for yourself that are not emotionally suppressive, because many self-care activities
Mm.
look for happiness, contentment, and joy. And so they are overusing those 3 emotions and not working with the others. And so, yeah, there's a lot of what I call empathic mindfulness skills in my work, because I want people to work directly with emotion so that they have that experience. Like that focusing practice is a part of grounding, the listening. So now we're working with fear, and the other part of grounding is working with sadness. Boundaries is anger. There's all different ways that we can work with emotions and become friends with them, so that people, if they're dealing with very painful emotions, help them find where that emotion is at that listening place where fear is.
Mm.
Help them drop down and then learn the skills and gifts of that emotion, and why is it so high in you? What's its purpose? What is it doing there?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I want to take this line of questioning one step further. If somebody said, okay, Karla McLaren for president, we are so enrolled in what you're up to here. We're going to put, several $billions into making the world better because we now have this understanding of emotions. What might we do? What might we implement? What's your wildest dream here?
Let's get my children's book published.
One.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, to the extent that we can, let's get everybody a healthy emotional vocabulary.
Hmm.
And let's learn to welcome emotions as the genius that they are, because we've tried it the other way and look where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Look what happened when we were taught to be cruel to a foundational aspect of our own psyches.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if we're cruel to aspects of our own psyches, it's not such a big leap to be cruel to another human or to an animal.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that sort of the starting place is within our own psyches, becoming welcoming and honoring and respectful of what shows up there?
Mm-hmm. And then you can sort of spread it out into your networks, as long as you don't act like a jerk on Facebook like I did. I got over it, okay? I was just really pissed off. But I tried it out. I mean, when I say acting like a jerk, you wouldn't even know it, but I know that I'm acting like a jerk. You're like, well, Carla, it seemed like you were making sense. I was like, no, I was scoring points. I was being a jerk. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Karla, I've asked you so many questions, and I want to just say, what have we not touched on? What is important to surface here today?
Just, I think that everyone is an emotional genius underneath all of our bad training. You can see it when there's a death and suddenly there's a beautiful grief ritual that just springs up out of nowhere. Where do people get the candles? I don't know, right? Where do those flowers come from? Why do they know to walk quietly and sing? We know inside ourselves. Emotions are here and they've been talking to us our whole lives long. They are ready and willing and able to help us shift, and it's not difficult. You would think it's really, really hard. It's not difficult. You do have to kind of remind yourself, wait, depression is good? No,
Yeah.
depression is
Yeah.
useful because it feels like crap. But, but to understand that emotions are never the problem, they come to help us deal with the problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You grace us with your insight here. Well, I am getting wonderful questions from the audience, and I'd love to turn that way. And at the end, we'll make sure we talk a little bit about how folks can get their hands on your book and other resources. Sound good? Okay. So we have a question from Miriam Goldstein, who says, how do we best help ourselves and others with the unexpected changes created by 3 months of being closed? I imagine in quarantine or in shelter in place.
Thank you. That's such a good question, because anxiety couldn't do stuff, right? We didn't know when we would be open, and we didn't know what would happen. What I found was really helpful was to start focusing more on the present moment. And I saw a lot of people do that. They were gardening, they were baking bread, it became a joke, but people were trying to settle into the now. And as we're opening up, whether it's a good idea or not, I'm saying no. Then anxiety has a lot of work to do to make sure that we're all safe and that we care for each other, right? So, so yeah, there's a thing with anxiety is you can bring it closer. What do I need to do now? What truly needs to get done? Because if you let it go, it can be like, whoa, it can go so far forward. It needs some boundaries around it.
Ah, you're talking about setting boundaries with emotions. Anything else you want to say about that? It's nuanced.
There's a chapter on anxiety.
Yeah.
And anger, if you don't have enough anger and your anxiety's gone really far, you're going to agree to so many things that no human could ever do. And your anger would say, excuse me, is this what we value? Is this, huh? Why don't we do this? Let's put a thing around it. Let's,
Yeah.
yeah. So anger would help you set a boundary around. This is anger that you know how to work with. It's not just like, screw you, anger. But to be able to say, no, these are my values. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay. We have another question. What is the relationship between emotions like anxiety and the body? Sometimes it feels like anxiety is very much in my body and not just emotional, like stored traumas in the body from childhood.
Mm-hmm. I would say that anxiety is, and all emotions rise from the body. They are bodily sensations, but they are also cognitive. And so each person, because we're also different, feels anxiety and every other emotion very differently. They also show them very differently on the face and in their behavior. So, how your anxiety shows up is important for you. If it's stored and it's a trauma, we're talking about panic. And your anxiety will be involved, because if you've got a stored trauma that isn't resolved, then it's going to slow you down in the present and the future, and your anxiety is going to know that, and it's going to want to help you get on top of that. I'm saying that in a very loving way, but sometimes it'll drive you nuts. So to be able to understand why anxiety and panic are hooking up together like that is really helpful.
Got it. And I'm imagining sometimes you can do that on your own, and other times the help of a friend or even a therapist is really essential.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The question from Monica Norcia, she says, what about anxiety that isn't linked to doing? This seems to be very focused on tasks and very linear. What about if there isn't anything that needs to be done, but it's more existential?
I would say existential anxiety, I want to know first if there's any dread or danger in it. If there's dread or danger and it's existential, then we're talking about panic. And a lot of people are having existential anxiety about everything that's going on.
Right.
Everything. We don't know, what's happening. And there's a part of us that is afraid and anxious and panicky and should be. And so then what do we do with that? What can we plan? What can we do to support ourselves and create a more just world? It's a big question. Our poor little emotions are like, we're trying to help. We're all here. We're trying to give you some energy and focus for this. But it is a difficult time for all of us and our emotions.
This reminds me of a conversation that I often have with my students who are really focused on social justice and providing support at the level of the community. And something that comes up is not only what if we're just band-aiding gaping wounds, but what if we are like the Tylenol that deadens symptoms or pain, but actually numbs people to a place where action, where frankly revolution is indicated. And I wonder about the ethics of therapy in that context.
That's a big
It
question.
is. This is what we talk about.
Yeah, but I think it's so important. Someone said that when there's trouble, when there's clearly trouble with race, white people start book clubs. And there's a way that I'm like, yeah, that's okay. But realizing how how intentionally ignorant we have been made about our position as white people, how much we don't know. Why didn't I know about Black Wall Street? Why didn't I know about the bombs that were dropped? Why didn't I know that? Why didn't I know about Juneteenth until like 5 years ago? What else don't I know? And so I think reading is really important. But they're right. If people are just going out and protesting and not voting, or just doing a book club and not making any changes in their behavior, and not choosing anti-racist city council members and mayors and police commissioners and that sort of thing from the ground up, then yeah, it is just a panacea. And nobody needs that anymore.
Yeah, I appreciate that. In the days when mindfulness and yoga have become sort of ubiquitous, I think there are times when we preach self-care when community care is what's indicated. And I appreciate your perspective on that. Yeah. Okay, we have another great question here. This is from Monica Weston. She says, we get anxious about things we can't know and can't control. What happens when we don't know what the future will bring?
Well, since we can never know what the future will bring, like ever, all we can do is prepare ourselves as best we can. And that's anxiety's job, with the help of other emotions. That's why one of the questions is what truly needs to get done. And I find that needing certainty may be a sign that there isn't what I see, and I'm not talking about you, Monica, I'm just having this idea, but what I see when people get very anxious about the future is there's an underlying statement, which is, I'm not going to be okay when I get there. It's not going to be okay. And then that's different emotions. Is it shame? Is it panic? What else is happening? Because anxiety is about preparing you for the future. And then there's this one out saying, but I don't know, but I don't know. So is it confusion? So it may be that there's different emotions in there working. But yeah, all we can do is what we can do. I would like to be in more control than that. Sorry, says the world. Sorry, pal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, this is a question from David Ketter. Given what I've heard thus far, I'm wondering if there's any difference between anxiety which comes from projecting past events onto current situations. Is there no difference?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, I would say that there might be a shame issue there where you didn't do well in the past event, and then you're projecting forward, and then your anxiety is sort of like, what can I do? At that point, it would be time to work with the shame, or maybe it's grief, or maybe it's depression, grief about a loss you couldn't control, shame about not feeling that you did your best, depression, an emotion that comes forward to kind of pull your energy away when things are not gonna, don't go forward, do not go forward, things are not gonna go well. So it could be any of these emotions. And that's another thing. There are only 4 words in the entire English language for emotions that show up together. And that's how emotions work. So our language, like, intentionally, I don't know if it's intentional, our language gives us no language for the way that emotions work.
And these are words like ambivalent, or
There's, let's see, gloating, which is savage glee about the misfortune of another. you have won and they've lost and you're just being a jerk. Ambivalent,
Mm-hmm.
which is you're actually feeling two emotions, one positive and one negative, and you can't function. I'm like, really, English language? Honestly?
Uh-huh.
Another one is bittersweet, which is a
Mm.
happiness and a sadness, but it's also a flavor, so I'm not giving English that one. Just no English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you
And
invent a lot of words to help make up for this.
yeah, that's where we made up anxiety and anxiety, and we're on our own here, friends.
Anxiety.
Yeah, I think I was anxiety, but it was impossible to say, so it's depressiety.
Deep anxiety. Got it. Well, I hope these make it into Merriam-Webster here shortly. Okay, next question. This is from Zara. What is your take on the 12-step model that essentially says that anger is the foundation of addiction? If all emotions are valid and useful, how can you feel them without staying in them too long?
Well, number one, I don't agree with the 12-step model, and I don't agree that anger is the foundation of addiction. I do agree, though, that a person's inability to manage or work with their emotions is the foundation of addiction. And this is the work of Lance Dotus in his beautiful, loving, empathic book, The Heart of Addiction. It's world changing. And what he is looking at is addiction is an intelligent action we take when we are in too much pain to manage, and that we go to the addictive substance to try to give ourselves some kind of relief. The problem is that no addictive substance can address what the emotions are coming to bring to us. So the addictive cycle begins immediately, right? The cycle is the fact that what you're using to deal with the issue will never deal with the issue. And so I just love he's a psychiatrist. He worked at, I think, Harvard, and watched people going through 12-step programs 100, 200, 500 times and failing. And the reason I love him so much is because he didn't look at the people and say, wow, you are a mess. He said, this model is a mess.
Mm.
This model is a mess. And there's a lot of 12-step people who are very angry with him, but he's okay with that. He's an elite white male, so he's got that privilege going for him. But um, looking at that work just changed everything. And yes, it is an emotional issue, but it is not a character flaw. It is not something that needs to be excised from a person. A person going toward addiction is trying to deal with emotions that are too painful for them to deal with at their level of current skill. And there we go. Now the 12-step people are going to come for me.
Well, what I appreciate is just your honoring that that is the best choice available to them in that moment. And that if they had a better skill or a better response, they would use it.
Yeah. And sometimes the pain is so intense.
Mm.
What are they going to do? At least they're trying to do something to make themselves function and make themselves feel better. But it's just, there's so much pain in this world.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then this is perhaps a related question. This is from Linda, who says, what if you have anxiety in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep? Should you get up and channel the anxiety even if you're exhausted? What about that which happens in our sleep or when you're trying to sleep?
When I wrote the book, Embracing Anxiety, I worked with a group of people in DEI. We called ourselves the Anxioneers. And I chose among them people who I call anxiety shrines, because might call them anxiety disordered in the pathology paradigm, but what I call them is shrines where anxiety loves to visit. And Francine Bélanger from Ontario, Canada, would be kept up all night. She had terrible insomnia. And
Mm.
she learned to keep a book by her bed, to write down everything her anxiety was telling her at night when she would wake up. And eventually she was able to do it before she went to bed. So she was able to retrain her anxiety, sort of, you go here, set a boundary for the anxiety. I'm writing it all down. We got 8 hours. I'm going to be okay. I can write it down again. So it helped her to work with her anxiety like like she and it were babies that needed support instead of I'm gonna, get out my whip and tell my anxiety what to do. Um, and yeah, if I don't deal with anxiety in that way, so I really needed the help of the anxioneers who work with anxiety every day. And I just love that idea. She carries paper and pen with her everywhere because her anxiety always has something to say. So she just
Wow.
made a place for it.
Yeah. And gave it a job to do.
Yeah. Anxiety loves that.
Yeah. Well, this is a very related question then. Zara writes, how do you balance the preparing with anxiety that leads you to over preparing? Like, how do you know when to stop?
Yeah, that's the question, what truly needs to get done, right? Because anxiety has so much energy that if you just ask, hey, anxiety, what do you want to do today? Yay!
We have lots of things. Yeah.
What? And also sometimes you'll notice other emotions will come up when you're over preparing, like confusion, and people will be like, "What? Why am I confused? I need to get stuff done." But confusion will come up to give you a break, and so will depression. They will come up and just pull some of that energy out so you can take a rest when you haven't built rests into your behavior around anxiety. And so yeah, it's like a skill set with anxiety. It's so powerful. Yeah.
I realize this talk is not about depression, but I really just appreciate you tossing that in there, that depression arises with function, with purpose, to give us a break, to pause on something that's maybe not directionally correct for us. Is that the right idea?
Yeah. And I think one of the problems people get into with depression is nobody wants to be told that it's time to stop,
Mm.
right? We're going to get things done. We're going to get her done and we're going to do what we want to do. And you can't tell me. And so depression is like, yes, I can.
Watch
So
me.
something's wrong. Yeah, just watch me, friend. Something's wrong physically. Something's wrong in your relationship. Something's wrong in your job. Something's wrong in your community. And your depression sort of pulls away your energy so you can't walk forward doing the wrong thing with the wrong intention for the wrong reasons. Right? It's a very protective emotion, but it's hard to see it that way at first. And this is situational depression. This isn't major or bipolar or postpartum.
Got it. Yeah, I can imagine for somebody who has been told you have a neurotransmitter imbalance in your brain and that's why you're depressed, that the idea that no, this is actually speaking up to me about something that's not quite right could be liberating and also confronting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be that the depression is because there's something going on with your neurotransmitters. Do you know what I mean? It's like it could be both. But generally, when you start asking the questions for depression, there will be a lot of stuff that comes up like, oh, yeah, I don't want to be doing this or that, or no.
So there are very specific questions that you'd ask in response to depression that would sort of elucidate what might be happening underneath here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I call it ingenious stagnation.
Oh, wow. I love it. Yeah. Well, we had a very similar question. Somebody said, can you clarify the grief distinction? What's the use and the value of grief? Can you just touch on that again?
Now, those are three emotions that are also up now during COVID and during the revolution. Please, please let it be a revolution, like a good one. But sadness, depression, and grief are all up at the same time. Sadness is the emotion that helps you let go of things that aren't working anyway. With sadness, you have a choice. And a lot of people, sadness will come up and they'll think sadness came to steal their stuff. No, sadness arises when there's something that you need to let go of. And so people can get into trouble with their sadness because I don't have to. You're not the boss of me. Yes, sadness is the boss of you at this time. um, Depression comes up when you are heading towards something or something's in the way of you getting where you need to go, health or situations or relationships or whatever. And depression is going to kind of take your energy out from under you. Grief is different from both. With sadness, you have a choice. With depression, you're making choices that don't really work. With grief, the person has died, the thing has died, the idea has died, the situation has died, or you never had something that other people took for granted, like a happy childhood. You'd
Mm.
have grief over that. Grief is a more powerful emotion than sadness because it has more powerful work to do. And what I notice is if people don't work with their sadness, depression or grief are going to need to come up.
Right.
They're in the same family, right? So if people deal with a lot of depression and a lot of grief, I also have them do some sadness practices, just like let go
Mm.
regularly,
Mm-hmm.
like bring sadness in, because these other emotions are kind of doing the work of two.
Yeah. Well, this is the question that comes up for me then. Our emotions arise with so much wisdom, with so much work to do. What is your take on the source of our emotions, right? What is the place from which emotion springs that has all this wisdom?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I see them as the most brilliant things, just unbelievably brilliant. And I think they're parts of our survival skills, they're parts of our cognition, they're parts of our social skills. I see them as sort of everything now. And maybe Rumi was right. They come to us as a gift from beyond.
Mm.
I think only the poets could tell us where emotions come from. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, we have a question. Man, more questions about control. So Charlie Ann says, I have a lot of anxiety about things out of my control, like wildfires, and we've had to evacuate before. Is there anything I can do to help let go of things that are out of my control?
I would check in about whether there's dread or a sense of danger,
Mm.
like wildfires. I live in Sonoma County. Everyone had to leave, right? While our houses may have been burning down. So yeah, wildfires. Um, I think there's a feeling in there of dread and danger, which means the panic is there. So the work would be with panic rather than anxiety, although anxiety would be there together. And that's one of the ways I've just like, when I'm feeling very riled up, I first check, do I feel dread or danger?
Mm.
Nope. Okay, this is anxiety. But if I do feel dread or danger, I know that I have some work to do with panic. Rather than I need to, what would you say if I had panic? That I need to fix myself,
Oh.
that I need to calm myself down or whatever. What I find and this is me, so it may not work for you at all, when there are things that are too huge for me to comprehend, I go into research. I start finding the people who know this thing. I start reading about people who have done well with wildfires and that sort of thing. I mean, sometimes it'll make me angry if my county is like a bunch of doofuses about wildfires or something like that. You doofuses. But then I'm in a different emotion. um, but but yeah, I think the idea of control is illusory.
Hmm.
I don't think that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
Gee, that's so comforting.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to sleep better
Thanks so
because of
much.
that.
I feel so much better now.
Yeah. I appreciate your truth on the matter. Okay. Sonnet Phelps writes, I know this talk is about anxiety, but I'm curious about your thoughts on shame. What does shame need, and how can we honor and work with it and move on?
I love shame. Shame, if anxiety's hated, oh my word, shame is despised. People want to chase shame out of town with pitchforks. They hate shame so much.
Mm.
And shame is a painful emotion, but the pain is necessary. Shame helps us live up to the agreements and the behaviors and the morals and the ethics that we have agreed to. And it will do that even if the morals and ethics and agreements that we've made are unlivable and disgusting. And so the work with shame is to make sure that everything you agreed to and all of your morals and ethics are updated and that you know what you're going to do. So if your shame says, I need to be nice to people and floss, right? Every time you're nice to people and you floss, your shame's like, nicely done. You miss flossing, your shame's going to be, excuse me, friend. But you made an agreement, and it's not going to let you go to sleep. And that's shame's job, because it's like a loyal watchdog or something. But let's say that your shame picked up a message that you will never be loved until you're perfect.
Mm.
So some poor soul comes to love you, and your shame goes banana crackers. Your shame goes off the deep end. And it is, 5-alarm fire of shame. And your experience would be, shame is the worst emotion I ever met,
Mhm.
right? But it's not the shame that's the problem. It is the agreements that are that the shame is working on. So the work with shame is to make sure, if you're feeling ashamed of, like unchangeable aspects of yourself, like, where did I pick up that message?
Mm.
And we have a practice called burning contracts, where we write it down and we get rid of it. And it doesn't work right away, because, what if you've been doing since you were a child? But your shame sees it, all your emotions see it. And the next time you start doing this thing, something is going to shake in your psyche.
Mm.
Something's going to be like, this doesn't feel right. And you're going to realize, oh, yeah, this
Right.
message. Yeah,
We're not doing that anymore.
I ain't doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I feel like I've been at a buffet of your wisdom and
Emotion buffet.
emotion buffet. Yeah. I want to just invite you, if you have any last thoughts to share before we wrap up, and also, how do we get our hands on your book?
The book is available wherever books are sold. And of course, you're going to want to go to independent and small bookstores.
Absolutely. Amen.
Like bookshop.org or Black-owned bookstores in an area near you. You can also go on my website. There's links to 4 places where you can get it, including bookshop.org. And what I would say about anxiety is, it has been misnamed. It has been pushed aside. It has been treated as pathology. And people who feel anxiety have not been seen as shrines, as living shrines. They've been seen as anxiety disordered. And I would like to bring those people into a knowledge and an understanding that they are a beautiful shrine that anxiety loves to visit, and that anxiety has genius and brilliance in it. And so do you. So if you're feeling just like about your anxiety, just what? Just understand that maybe it's trying to tell you something that you don't yet have the ears to hear, but it's in there. That capacity to listen is in there. You were born with it, and emotions are your first language. So you can definitely learn to pick it back up again.
Thank you so much for leaving us on a note of inspiration and hope. It's been a joy speaking with you. I think Alex from CIIS Public Programs will join us again and just wrap us up. Hi there, Alex.
Hello, thank you both so much for that beautiful talk, and very timely and helpful for, I think, all of us in the audience. It was really wonderful. So thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
I will go ahead and stop your video. And thank you all so much in the audience for attending tonight. We hope you will join us for some more of our upcoming events. Our next event is going to be Lessons for Women of Color on the Rise, a conversation with Cecilia Munoz and Sonia Mignon on July 9th. That's going to be at 7 o'clock Pacific time. We've posted we posted a link in the chat if you want to learn more. The conversation was recorded tonight. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it can be found at this same link on YouTube or later on our Facebook page. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.